everyone, it's Jalen, and I'm here today with the last video in my series on point of view. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about third person. Third person is a point of view loved by many, and when I first set out to embark in the world of writing in third person, I made some major mistakes that I hope you can avoid because I really did some poorly done things in my first person adventure, but I've learned and I have things to share with you. To start off, this video is gonna get a little grade 8 Englishy, I'm sorry. The narrator and the character are two separate entities. The person telling the story is not the main character, and I do find it interesting to consider who that narrator is. Like, is it some sort of narrator spirit? Is it me? Am I supposed to be the narrator? I don't consider myself the third person narrator. Like, when I'm writing in third person, I don't think I'm the narrator. I feel like the narrator is just this like third person spirit that's kind of like hovering over the story. Why are they there? I don't know. These are questions that bother me because I don't have answers to them. There are 3 different types of third person. I'm going to explain them all at the start of this video, but I'm really only going to be focusing on one throughout the video. So the first one is called third person objective. This is when the narrator is kind of like a camera. It can see everything that's going on, but it cannot get into any mind or thought of any of the characters. You really don't see this very often because it is, to be honest, quite disconnected. You lose the capacity to see anything happening internally. The second mode of third person is called third person omniscient. It's not really used anymore. It means that the narrator can see everything that's happening and it can look into the mind of every single character. That's a lot. Now, you really don't see it very often. It's not something that's commonly used in modern literature. I think really carefully before you use it. It's very difficult to write, and I personally think it has a lot of disadvantages because it removes the mystery of characterization for every character. It can cause protagonist confusion where we don't actually really know who the protagonist is because we're in every mind at once. And it can also just be really jarring to be head hopping, like sentence by sentence. If you want to use it, look into it on your own. I'm not really going to be discussing it in this video because it's kind of a weird thing that I don't really know anything about. The last type of third person, and the most common one and the one that I think has the most benefits, is third person limited. This means that we can go into the mind and thoughts of only one character at a time. Now, a story that has multiple point of views, alternating by chapter, but each chapter is a third person limited, that's still third person limited. It's not omniscient because we're still only in one mind at a time. Just because you have multiple point of views does not make it omniscient. So we're only in the mind of one character at a time. The reason I see benefits to this, it's clear who the protagonist is, we won't be head hopping, so it's less jarring, easier to sympathize with the main character. I personally think it has the most advantages, and that's why it's the most commonly used, because it is the most advantageous. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of third person. Third person allows for a broader scope. It also has a more cinematic feel. You feel like you're watching the story like it's a movie. And you also have the ability to withhold character information without the character coming across as unreliable. It just means that the narrator's not sharing that. It doesn't necessarily mean that the character's choosing not to, so you can maintain more of a mystery around your protagonist. So, is it right for your story? Do you have a story that is too large or complicated for first person? A lot of information that cannot be organically conveyed in first person? Do you have a protagonist who might not be useful as a first person narrator? That is, maybe they have qualities that would make them a poor first person narrator. Perhaps they're heavily self-absorbed and it would just be so annoying to be in their head all the time. Or maybe they would be highly unreliable in a story that doesn't warrant an unreliable narrator. And do you, as the author, have the ability to convey character without constant access to voice and internal thought? If third person is sounding like the right choice for your story, what are some of the do's and don'ts of this point of view? First of all, watch out for shifting psychic distance. Psychic distance is how close we as the reader feel to the main character. It's generally very close when you're in first person because the narrator and the protagonist are one entity. But when you're in third person, you can have it shift. So we could be very far, or we could still be very close. Some stories are going to be farther. For most stories, it is advantageous to be closer to your main character, and you want to be making sure you're not really zooming in and out. That is a bit jarring to read. So some examples of what would shift the psychic distance would be using vocabulary that the main character wouldn't use. For example, if the main character refers to their mother as mama, but in the narrative, mother is referred to by her first name. That shifts the psychic distance. Filtering shifts the psychic distance, which is when you describe the main character experiencing something rather than simply describing the thing. For example, if you said he heard fireworks in the distance instead of saying fireworks sounded in the distance, or this could be something like he felt the chill of November wrap around him instead of saying the chill of November wrapped around him. That increases your psychic distance. Showing things that the main character can't see, for example, describing something happening in another room that they aren't aware of, pulls your psychic distance from the main character. Another thing you need to watch out for is head hopping. This is if you're writing in third person limited, but you mess up and start using third person omniscient. So we're in the main character's head, and it's third person from his point of view, but now we're accidentally sharing thoughts other characters are having. Now we're head hopping. From sentence to sentence, we're in point of views we shouldn't be in, we're telling things we shouldn't know, and that is quite jarring to read, so make sure that if you are in third person limited, that you stay confined to the mind that you're in. Yes, it is third person, but we are still in a mind. If you are writing in third person, this does not give you the excuse to not have to create voice for each point of view. I know that it is much easier to write a multi-perspective story from third person because the voice doesn't have to be as drastically different, but it still needs to be there, and you should have your own voice for each protagonist. Kind of what I was saying earlier about using vocabulary that character would use. Things like that, just to stay closer, because if you're really far and if you're using the same voice for every character, then you have a farther psychic distance. Now let's talk about tense. I discussed this in my first person video, and again, you're probably going to be in either present or past. Now, present you do not see very often with third person, and the reason is because in first person, the advantage of present tense is that it allows for the tension of unknown outcome. But in third person, you still have the tension of unknown outcome, even in past tense, and the reason is because the narrator is telling the story from the point where the story has already ended. But the main characters don't know. The main characters don't know what is going to happen. So you still have tension of unknown outcome, even from the past tense. Generally, you do see the past tense paired with the third person because the advantage of present tense isn't really there, so you might as well just use past, and it's generally easier to write. I've said this in all of my point of view videos so far, but make sure you avoid the overuse of he or she or whatever pronoun your character goes by. This seems strange. How am I supposed to avoid using pronouns? Well, it's kind of the same as in present tense, and I think the thing that is not intuitive about third person is that even though the narrator is separate from the main character, we are still witnessing the story kind of through the eyes of the protagonist. And because we are in their mind, you do not need to remind us that things are happening in relation to that character. I'm going to use the fireworks example again. If fireworks sound, we don't need to be told that the main character hears it. They're being told in the narrative. We know they're being heard by the main character because we are in that main character's head, just in a different way. The last thing I want to say is to be seamless with thoughts. Now, a lot of the time in third person, we do the thing that I did when I wrote my novel in third person, which is where we write first person thoughts and we just italicize them. This isn't technically incorrect, like it is okay, and I wouldn't say to never do it, but for the vast majority of the time, you don't need to do that. I'm gonna flip through this book and I'm gonna find an example of this. Here in my book, I found an example of myself, as the writer, italicizing thoughts that were written in first person. It says, "Then I guess I'll have to walk until I'm an old woman and spend only my dying days in that safe forest with eyes that see blackness and a mind that sees light." This could have been written with no italics in third person, simply as she would have to walk until she was an old woman and spend only her dying days in that safe forest with eyes that saw blackness and a mind that saw light. I think I just tense jumped like 5 times because I was improvising. There was absolutely no reason for that to be first person from Rhett's point of view. Like, I could have just smoothly integrated it into the narrative, but I didn't because I was stupid. Again, here's another one. He could hear Annette scolding him from within his head. "You have to keep your senses sharp, Taeth." He took another sip. He scolded the Annette and his consciousness back. "Not drinking is a Vatran thing, and I'm pretty sure I'm no Vatran." That could have just been, Annette scolded him from within his head. We can cut the "he could hear" because that's a filter. "You have to keep your senses sharp, Taeth." He took another sip. He scolded the Annette in his conscious back. "Not drinking is a Vatran thing, and he was no Vatran." It's so much more seamless, it's so much more smooth, and in 99% of cases, it's the better way to convey thought. It's less jarring because you're not jolting through point of views, so it's better. And you also don't even need to say, he thought. Like, I didn't need to tack on, and he was no veteran, he thought. I would recommend just integrating the thoughts into the narrative because, again, that just keeps you closer to the main character even in third person, which is generally said to be the greatest downfall of third person, that distancing from narrator and protagonist. But if you do it well, you can keep them pretty close and you can be very close to that main character. So that is my video today on third person. I hope this was helpful if you are embarking into the world of third person. I know I really should have learned all of this before I wrote an entire book in third person and screwed it up because I didn't know what I was doing. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I will see you in another video. Bye.